Should be good. I muted the YouTube audio.
Okay. Can everybody hear all right? We're live on YouTube. And I guess if you don't mind, I'll let everybody know that Chuck, Mayor Vest is in the hospital, and Glenn Rosenoff is on the committee. He's our new town administrator in Jonesboro, and need to welcome him. But Glenn just gave me an update saying that Chuck is doing okay, except that he had what, 95% blockage in the main artery. Or you might give us
That's
a report.
right. Yeah, so he had some tests done and then finally did a stress, and all the other tests were okay, and the stress revealed possible blockage. So he went ahead and had the exam today, and they saw 95% blockage in the main artery. Wow. So they fixed that, and his text to me was he's feeling great. So it wasn't good, it was great. So sorry that he had to miss this, but he's here in spirit with us.
So if you don't mind, I'll go ahead. This meeting is largely set up for Jay McCusker and Ken to have a discussion about layouts. That's pretty much the agenda. We did have a meeting with a panel of principals that Dr. Flannery put together yesterday that was very helpful to us in terms of looking at issues of classroom access and this kind of thing, especially with CDC students and pre-K, and what their needs were that are definitely going to impact the building layout. And we've been sort of discussing some of those changes that might need to take place in the building layout. But we need to do, I think, two things, and Town Attorney Jim Wheeler is on this group, and has instructed us that as long as we're doing an electronic meeting, that we need to have a vote to declare this a necessary a determination of a central government function. So if Jim, you want to just do that and take a vote on that?
We can do that. We need just if someone would make a motion to determine.
Jody, I'll make a motion that this is essential business and okay to meet by electronic means under the governor's order.
I second that.
Who seconded it?
I did.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Okay, there's any discussion about that? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that passes. I guess the next thing is to take care of the minutes of the last meeting. We didn't really have any way of doing that, other than it's kind of hard to keep track of who's doing what and keep handwritten minutes. And so Sheila Watson, administrative assistant, pretty much went over the recording. So it's somewhat lengthy, but it's also pretty informative anyway. So have you all read through the minutes? Does anybody have any changes, any corrections? If not, we need a motion to approve that.
Motion to approve the minutes.
That came from Brian Barnett. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Okay, there's a motion, a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Not any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, and if it's you have any other business before we undertake the discussion of the building layout? All right, if
Bob,
not,
Bob, can I make a motion to move agenda item 4 up so that we can just take care of that before we get into really what the meat of this meeting's about?
I guess, do you need a motion, Jim, or can they just change the item 4? I can't hear you. You're muted, I guess.
Sorry about that. Since it's already on the agenda, that wouldn't be necessary if he wants to make a motion regarding that item.
Do you have a motion, Brian?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
You want to make that? Jim said we don't have to vote to change the agenda. We can go ahead and address if you want to have a motion on that item 4 on that. That's just a committee chairman.
Yeah, I wanted to make a motion to nominate Chuck to be the committee chair. I know he couldn't be here, but I just wanted to recommend him just based on his leadership and dedication for the project, and you know, just the respect he's earned not only of the town that he serves mayor, but also the parents and staff of both Jonesboro schools that we're looking to build this for. So I just wanted to nominate him because you know, he's always been going forward, moving forward with everything, and you know, just speaking with class and respect to everything, and kept all the meetings you know, always moving forward and always in a positive light. And I think that's what the committee chair should be.
Okay, he's made a motion that Chuck Vest be elected chairman. Is there of the committee? Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, that's Glenn.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Okay, without hearing any discussion, you know, all those in favor say aye. Okay, any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, so somebody he may go back into heart failure or something. If we'll let him get out of the hospital before we give him the good news.
Bob, could I address one more thing regarding staffing while you're on that item? The town, committee members of the town has envisioned that Bob would serve as secretary and handle the minutes and things like that, utilizing some of the staff. So I'm not sure it's necessary for you to elect anybody else. If you all are satisfied with that, then, you know, I don't think it'll be often, but when Chuck's not here, you can just let Bob sort of to run your agenda if you're satisfied with that. Otherwise, you would need to elect, you know, someone to lead the meeting in Chuck's absence. I would say that, Mr. Secretary, you need to understand that these meetings from this point on will need to be, if there are votes taken, they need to be roll call. So you need to get set up where you've got a roll that you can call for each vote.
Okay.
But I think we're fine where we are right now, but moving forward, if you have a vote, let's do it by roll call.
I'll try to improve if you all want me to take that role, but I'm fine either way. So.
And I don't think you need a vote on that if there's a consensus. It's not an official position or anything, but anybody has an objection to that and wants to nominate somebody as a vice chair or secretary, they can do that if they can talk somebody else into taking the minutes like this.
I think Sheila's probably the only one who will be, who would like to see a change. Anyway, I'm glad either way. All right, with that, we'll continue, and I'll turn it over to Ken and to Jay. If you all, again, we apologize. I think there was we have really been working on this thing, and we've got so many different versions of some of those same options. It's kind of hard for us to keep up with them, and we're still working on these overall layouts and the blocking of the major square footage spaces and the relationship, the parking and everything else. Todd Wood, who's back behind me, is listening in. Todd's the civil engineer on the project and has done a great job of looking at how the building orientation, works with the drop-off spaces, the bus drop-off and this kind of thing. And so he's put a lot of work into trying to make the flow in and out of the building space, regardless of which option we land on, to be functional. And the access to the building and those drop off, which we talked about at the last meeting, is really a big deal. It's a major time saver for parents and for kids in terms of being able to get in and out of school. So we'll continue to work on that. But if Jay, you and Ken can sort of go into these building layouts and the pros and cons of those.
And we will let Jay do that since he's done the work on making these layouts. So Jay, if you would like to go over them with everyone.
Sure. Thank you, Ken. I'm going to try an experiment here. I'm going to try to share my screen. Give me 1 second. You can let me know if it works. Or Bob, can you send that over to me?
What am I sending?
The ability to share content.
Yeah.
You have to enable that. It's not critical if we don't, but I thought it might be helpful to have the schemes up on the screen that we're actually talking about. So
Am I hitting share screen? Is that what I'm hitting?
I think you need to be able, what we need to do is send it over to somebody else. So in this case, allow them to do that. Okay. I think you need to make me a co-host.
You let my share screen.
Yeah. That's what I was doing. You click right there.
I don't know if I hit the right thing or not. You let my brain power leave.
Ah, here we go.
Okay.
Let's see. Maybe we'll just go ahead with okay, can everybody see this?
No,
No.
No? Okay.
No.
No problem. We'll just go back to, we'll just do it the old fashioned way, I guess. So anyway, thanks for your patience. So as Bob mentioned, we have several different options and variations on a theme that we're looking at here. So I'm going to try to keep this concise so that way it makes as much sense as possible, and I want to avoid confusion. So the first thing to look at when you're looking at these schemes, I just want to point out what the symbols mean. The first option has a space allocation legend. And just real briefly, anything in green is a teaching space. Anything that is yellow would be a large scale public function type space. Red indicates an administrative function, and gray is building support. So it'd be storage or mechanical, electrical, data, or toilet rooms of some sort. And then there's some of these have a blue space, and that is actually a holdover from the original concept That was when we thought we would need an athletic facilities office in the building, but we are essentially going to remove that and replace that with other function. So you could disregard the blue. That's something that we determined fairly recently in the process. And then we talked about before we talked about the classroom breakdown and just really quickly, all of these are based on a similar breakdown of 1,100 students. And what we have is 2 pre-K classrooms for each scheme. And that is based on input from the district. So we remove students for those rooms, and then we have the rest of the classrooms distributed with fairly equal student distribution among the grades. And we know that that's going to move up or down depending on whether they have a large class year or a smaller class year. Those classrooms may be redistributed. But the baseline for the building will be 6 kindergartens, 6 first grade, second grade, and third grade, 5 fourth through 6th grade, and then 4 each of 7th and 8th. And then 4th through 8th each has its own science lab. The remainder of the building layout is based off of, so the special spaces are largely based off of Boones Creek. Again, that's the most recent project in the district, so we are trying to match that. And we're going to, we've had some discussion about what we might add or subtract to that, and we'll develop that as we move along. Some common features that we're building in, we're trying to minimize square footage here. We have certain security requirements that we are trying to work with. The main being we want to maximize security for the least amount of expense. So sight lines are important. And to that end, the main goal there is to eliminate extra corridors wherever possible. We'll talk about the impact of that in a little bit. We're also working with the concept that we want to separate bus traffic from parent drop-off and pickup traffic. And we touched on that last time when we talked about the site plan, and we can get into more detail as we talk about the site plans further on. Todd can tell us a lot about that. And the way that interfaces with the building is both of those drop-offs enter into a common space. I kind of think of it as the common or the mixing hall. And that space becomes very important to the building because it's the main organizing element. And it also becomes the nexus where the SRO will be able to see down the classroom corridors and provide line of sight security. We are trying to keep all of the large scale elements together in one spot, and you'll see that being a common theme throughout. And then we're otherwise simply trying to keep all of the spaces next to the appropriate spaces next to each other and avoid conflicts with incompatible spaces being too close. So the influencers we're working with, we have certain site adjacencies. For instance, we want the gymnasium to be near the athletic fields. We want the entrances to have lots of parking available to them. We want, for instance, the CDC classrooms to be able to have a drop-off. And as we learned from the principal discussion yesterday, pre-K needs to have direct access for drop-off. That way they could bypass the main office. So that's something that's not incorporated, but that's something we've had discussion on since. And then we're also trying to prioritize classrooms. So for instance, the CDC classroom location is far more critical than where 8th grade goes. So that's going to be something that as we move forward becomes more important. And then we were also, of course, looking for design opportunities. How can we maximize the impact and make this a good looking building without having to spend a lot of extra money on materials and elements and features? So we're going to start with the bones of it and basically use every dollar that we can as effectively as we can. Now we do have some site constraints. Of course, we all talked about the topography. That's going to be the main one. Another one is going to be the building orientation. and we'll talk about that when we get into the site plans as well. We also are looking at building security, as I mentioned. We need to eliminate extraneous entrances and exits as much as possible. And again, the line of sight issues become important. And of course, the project budget, we only have so many dollars per square foot to spend, so we need to maximize each one of those dollars. And then the building program, there's only so many elements that could be placed up on a second floor. And so when you look at these schemes, we essentially place all the same elements on the same level. That is another common thread throughout. And it's basically by necessity that there's a little bit of room to adjust, but not much. So let's look at option 1 and 1, or I suppose 1A and 1B. They're very similar with the exception of the location of the cafeteria, a couple little other minor details. But essentially what we're looking at here is we enter, again, next to admin, that would be the parent pickup and drop off side. And then we also have the bus drop off side. There's an arrow between guidance and the dark green square just on the other end of the mixing hall by the stair. And so all of the students come into the same space. There's plenty of room to maneuver and put the kids where they need to go. So if they're going to go to classrooms, there's plenty of room to get the kids there. If they're going to go to the cafeteria for breakfast, they can do that. Or if everyone's going to get funneled into the gymnasium, you can do that. Or if different groups need to do different things, plenty of room for that. The other feature that provides is it's a built-in lobby for when the school is hosting events. So if it's a band performance or a chorus performance, or you got a ball game, so anything along those lines, you can use that mixing hall as a pre-function area that's automatically going to support a large number of people. So again, we're trying to maximize what we use the square footage for. And I think that becomes an important element as we try to gain building efficiency. So each of these schemes has a mixing hall of some sort, and they all feature at this point a main entrance from parent drop-off, from the bus drop-off, a stairway, some sort of a grand stairway, and then an elevator nearby. You'll also find that the administration is immediately adjacent on one side, and that will help us provide that security bypass lobby that we talked about a little bit earlier, where you can have the doors open for when the kids are coming in, and you need large volume of either entering the building or leaving the building. But then once class has started, or after school, or before school opens up, you can lock down the inner set of doors and people can come into the vestibule, but they have to go into and get checked in at the main desk at administration before they can be let in. And we can set certain locks to have certain levels of security depending on what the district decides. Beyond that, you have all of the main stuff happening in this scheme, again, in the central location. That's going to eliminate travel distances. For instance, one of the issues that's come to light at Boones Creek is that the cafeteria, the gymnasium, all those large scale spaces are at one far end of the building. So if you're, for instance, in the 8th grade and you need to get to gym class, you need to walk the entire length of the building in order to get there, or go outside and be outside the security perimeter. So we've eliminated that by putting those spaces in the middle, and everybody gets a fairly equal shot at getting to gym class on time. And we've eliminated those walking distances for the kids who really just should not be forced to walk long distances.
While you're let me break in and say, one of the things with the principal panel that they really homed in on yesterday was the fact that the CDC and pre-K students really needed to have close access to the cafeteria, to preferably the related arts, to the administration area in case the assistant principal needed to be called in for restraint or something of that nature. So they also have direct access issues. And so they become kind of to some extent, maybe a driving force in terms of the building layout, just because of the needs of those groups.
Yes, and we're also one of the main, some of the main feedback we got from the CDC and special ed group in general is also that they want to eliminate distraction, that what we need to do is make sure that the CDC is not located right next to the gymnasium, although it needs to be fairly close based on our feedback from yesterday. So the strategy these prototypes use is to put them on the ground floor. That is, logically they should be on the ground floor. And we've put them at the end of a corridor, and we've put preference on putting them at the end of the short corridor. Now, we're learning that we may need to move them further in, but the idea here is that we can eliminate unnecessary student traffic from coming past those classrooms, and it can operate as more of its own pod, even though it's part of the main classroom corridor in the building diagram. So we're hoping that might give them what they need, but we may have to change that depending on what we get in terms of additional feedback and as we develop the plan. So that is something that we learned yesterday. We'll see how where those particular classrooms end up. So downstairs, you're going to have all the major stuff needs to be downstairs. So administration, guidance, gymnasium, cafeteria. All students, second grade and below, need to be on a ground floor. That is one of the requirements for elementary schools. So everything else has a potential to go upstairs depending on access. So starting at third grade, this particular scheme, we're putting 3 and 4 together off the north wing, and then 5, 6, 7, and 8 are on the south wing. And that is where you get the larger classroom sizes. It's where you also end up with more of the science labs. You do have one science lab for 4th grade, but the majority end up on the south wing. And then we, again, placing preference to access to large scale spaces. We place the media center up on that floor as well, where it can overlook the main parent drop-off entrance, have great access from all areas of the building, and then also overlook that mixing hall on the north edge where you enter. You'll notice that across the mixing hall, essentially the gray rectangle by the elevator, and again, all of these schemes, the elevator is the little white box that has an E in it. So that gray box represents additional program that we know we're going to need. We're not sure exactly where all of it's going to go, but we expect it to be distributed throughout the building as we develop the scheme. We're simply saying that that's about what we think you're going to need to cover the needs of the building. So at this scale, at this point in the development, we've just essentially got room set aside for it. And by the time we're done, we expect those blobs to go away and they'll just be distributed around. Let's see. So this version, again, we've clustered everything. This is the most in terms of building footprint. This one has clustered all of the gymnasium, the cafeteria, the kitchen, locker rooms, stage, all the tall stuff is in one pod. And that becomes very efficient in terms of needing to build exterior walls. If we can avoid building extra outside walls, then we don't have to pay for more brick or mortar net or insulation, all of that, because we can cluster it and tighten up on that. So that's what this version is doing on the large spaces. And then if you flip to version 1B, you'll see the main difference here is that we then flip the cafeteria across the hall and have it tucked across basically on what is the bus drop-off side. If you look at this, you compare that to the site plan. And what that does is provide, we were having a debate about whether it's going to be easier to provide delivery access that isn't terribly cumbersome or also overly visible and can be protected, because we don't want to have necessarily, garbage cans and can wash and all that stuff out where the kids are going to be a lot. So we're trying to figure out how that would work in this scheme. So this version essentially flips that guy over across the hall, and that's what that is for. That does introduce additional cost because you have, we've lost some of that economy in terms of the exterior walls. And then also we have to build a 1.5-story space on another part of the school. So there's additional cost because you have to build that roof, additional foundation and footing and stuff like that. But as an organization, it could work well because as the kids enter from the bus drop off, they can, they're coming right past the cafeteria. So it's very easy to get kids inside there. So there's benefits to that. And then there's some drawbacks as well. In this case, it's primarily going to be visibility of the kitchen stuff, and then also the cost.
Yeah, let me add something in here as well, Jay. If one of the other things that we've done on some of these plans is talk to our fire chief about fire protection, fire access. And if you go back to that scheme 1, you see that there's a drive. The cafeteria is one of the primary places within a school facility that a fire could. Obviously, the school's going to be sprinkled and there's lots of protections in there, but the cafeteria is a primary location in which a fire could exist. And so there has to be some kind of direct access to that. And so you see that loop all the way around on that version 1 that goes to the cafeteria, and that's for deliveries, but also for fire protection to be able to get something in there close to the cafeteria.
Yep. Yeah, and we would need to look at how that would actually function. The thing to consider here, and Todd was very helpful. Todd Wood was very helpful in looking at the grading on these schemes, which gives us a lot of information on whether we're putting it on cut, which is where you're just digging in to, you're digging down to set your foundation, or if you need to fill in and build it up to set a foundation. And what we're finding is that if you look at that cut fill line on this version, right where it says kitchen deliveries, you can kind of see how the existing contour might sweep around because it heads to the plan north, and then around further down the plan toward Cherokee Street. You can see how it kind of heads to the southwest. And what that means is the service drive would need to be fairly close to the building, because you otherwise have to build it out quite a ways, and you're putting all of that on fill. So you're not necessarily, that's not the most stable situation. And we have other program elements that we need to address, such as the vegetable and herb garden, any potential agricultural buildings that we put in there, stuff like that needs to go someplace. And then if you look right at the elbow of that little drive, you'll see it's labeled very steep slope. And that's essentially, I think, Todd, that was a 3-to-1 slope. So
if it's labeled steep slope, it's flatter than 3-to-1, and very steep would be 3-to-1 to 2-to-1.
Okay, thank you. So fairly significant. And we want to avoid having to put stuff right up against that, because even if you don't do a retaining wall, it does mean that you probably need to do some textile fabric or some other geotech remediation in spaces like that. So we just want to be careful about how much we do. Although if you look at this site plan, if you look at all of the site plans, in fact, you'll see that, as we talked about very early on, there's very little retaining wall to no retaining wall, and we have so far managed to maintain that promise. So if you look at this version of the plan, it will hold true for each version of option 1. The site plan is largely the same, with the exception of that access drive. And this version lays out very similarly to that original concept sketch that we had. So the bus loop is still right off Cherokee, and that is also where the faculty parking goes. We have our peninsula parking that we had last time that we talked about on the parent drop-off side, and a bisected parking area. And then we have auxiliary parking and athletic parking toward the north, running along the new street. That auxiliary parking also acts as our car stacking. So there's lots of room to get cars in there. And then the drop off, essentially, again, just reiterating on last time, we would have sets of cars pull up on either side of that drop off island. And we would be able to accommodate 17 cars on each side at one time. And they arrive together, load or drop off together, and then leave together, and that keeps an efficient traffic flow through. And so even if folks, the kid's not ready, they need to go around and get back in line, that line is constantly moving. It's not, we're eliminating traffic congestion, and that allows us to minimize load times and wait times, and that's pretty critical from a lot of standpoints.
Jay, may I?
I'm sorry?
On your plan 1B, you have the
Yes.
kitchen deliveries would be using the same road as the bus drop off?
Yes, that is one of the drawbacks of that option. That
Honestly,
get really
think,
easy access, but it is kind of out in front.
I honestly think that will not work because they're dropping off children the same time they're dropping milk off. The food companies, they do it early, but some of them come in and the school buses are coming in at the same time.
So these are not scheduled deliveries that they just arrive when they arrive.
I imagine they can be scheduled deliveries, but typically what we have going on in the system is that we keep the bus lanes and the car lanes with nothing else delivered there.
Okay.
A lot of our food delivery happens at like 4:30, 5:30 a.m. And it's really up to our vendors because they cover a lot of schools and other entities. So they come when they come.
Okay.
This is Jody. I have a question.
Mhm.
The current Jonesboro Schools kitchen provides meals for a bunch of other schools like University and I forget all of them, but is this kitchen going to have the same role in producing and distributing food to a bunch of other schools?
Good question. I had hoped and recommended that this school would have a prep kitchen rather than a receiving or satellite kitchen, but I don't know where the funding is.
Yeah, Jody, very early on, there was talk that Boones Creek might be able to fill that role. And we know they do provide more meals to other schools, but we're finding that this one, we would at least need to support itself. And if we need to support other schools as well, then we're going to need to figure out how that works in terms of the building. But the policy and the strategy would have to come from nutrition.
And remind me again which schools. It's University and the one that's way out there on Cherokee Road and maybe Midway or something like that.
I think so, although I don't recall offhand.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. I'm just making a note to follow up on that.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Both on your first two plans for the very first ones, 1A and 1B, what is your, as far as class traffic pattern, when you're talking about the gym and the cafeteria being in close proximity? With the cafeteria, you've got two classes going and coming into the gym. And then with the cafeteria, usually you have at least a whole grade level. So how does that traffic pattern look in the hallway there on both of those?
Well, part of it is, again, the larger circulation areas provides more room for large groups of kids to get by one another. So as one is leaving and then another is coming in, they should be able to pass without too much issue. You know, right now, I believe, for instance, at Boones Creek, we all, you know, again, to make a common comparison, you know, there isn't much additional mixing space outside the cafeteria, although the gymnasium, of course, does have its own lobby and vestibule area that's further off from the rest of the building. But what we've heard there is that even just getting to the gym generates enough additional traffic that getting kids past the cafeteria, and then so if you have got a gym class moving, and then you've also got music class coming and going, and then you've got cafeteria changing, you only have that 10-foot corridor for all those kids to get by. Here, the additional space would provide room that they can get by one another, and again, not be as congested. One of the disadvantages to clustering the large pieces all in one place is going to be that you're going to have more traffic there. But in this case, in part that we can have a lot of the traffic, you know, you've got two floors to bring kids from, and then you've got the larger spaces to mix and move around where you really get close to these spaces. I'm not saying you won't ever have congestion, but it can only be better than what they've been dealing with so far.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Go ahead, Jan.
It was just hard for me to visualize where the doorways and hallways were right there. So
okay, sure. Yeah. So if you're looking at, let's start with 1A. One of the things about, in fact, if you compare 1A to 1B, one of the things that we did in 1B is we pulled in the wall of the locker rooms so that we are providing access, we're indicating access from that main mixing hall into the gymnasium. What we would actually have, and you know, when we develop the plans further, we would need to have at least one secondary corridor, probably between the auxiliary gym and the locker room, that provides access to the gymnasium. So if you've got, you know, first grade, second grade, they don't need to change for gym class. They're just going to go right in, and you know, so they can bypass, you know, all of that other stuff and just pop right into the gymnasium, get started, and do what they're going to do. And then when you have large public events, you would need access from the mixing, you know, a more, you know, visually appropriate and scaled entrance from that mixing hall into the gymnasium as well. And we realized that we would need to develop that in the floor plan once we get to the point of actually creating more floor plan, you know, creating floor plans. And then from the cafeteria, I think that one's a little bit easier to understand in both the schemes, where you see the hallway indent toward the cafeteria. There's the two little gray boxes for each of them. On 1A, they're flanking either side of the cafeteria, and then they're clustered together in 1B. We envision those would be group toilets that would help accommodate those larger spaces. But the general idea there is, again, you've got more room for kids to mix and get by, or as a small pre-function area at the cafeteria, and then of course the larger space up at the gym. So that's essentially how we expect that to work. And we do acknowledge that, yeah, we're gonna have to develop that traffic flow pattern in the doors.
I just wasn't sure how much traffic would be going on right at the front doors, the way that was. So thank you for clarifying.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, one question about that is, you've got a hallway. Is that a hallway connection between the cafeteria directly into the gym in 1A?
It could be, and it depends on, there's a lot of ifs in that scenario. And one of the things that we may do, Bob and I talked about this, that that central area is gonna be, when we develop this as floor plans, there's gonna be a lot of little rooms. There's gonna be some interior corridors and things that are just built into these blocks. So even though they look landlocked, they're not necessarily, we can get to them in reality. Because again, these plans are really, these are not actual floor plans. They're just organization diagrams. So, but when you get, you could have access from the gymnasium to the cafeteria. One of the advantages that might pose is that, again, you could have your parents out in the mixing hall before the event, and you have the kids either staged. If it's an athletic event, of course, they'd be in the locker rooms. But if you're doing more performance, they could be set up in the cafeteria as a place to operate as a large green room, and then they can enter in the stage from the hall. But if you need to move tables and chairs or something from the gymnasium to the cafeteria, depending on the function, that direct connection does provide the ability to interoperate fairly flexibly.
I have a question. In your future plans to do more detail, do you have plans for a full service concession stand in the lobby of the gymnasium?
Yes.
Full service. Thank you.
Yeah, we're expecting that would be similar to, again, to what they provided in Boones Creek. So it's a fairly substantial, as far as concession stands go, it would be fairly substantial. I don't know. We'd have to do an assessment of what that equipment is in there, but it would be a similar level of service.
One of the reasons I asked the question is the process of building Grandview. We were close to being finished and we realized there was not a drain in the concession stand, nor any running water. So that's why I asked the question.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to make sure that we plan for that early on. So,
you ready to go to 2?
I was thinking that, unless there's questions about option 1 first.
So the only question I had was on the security end that we had talked about earlier on. You had talked about line of sight.
Yes.
I was curious on each plan if those, how is that evaluated? Whether it's a good line of sight or poor, or who determines that?
Ultimately, it would be determined by the SRO, and I would say probably Jonesboro PD, the Sheriff's Department. We've already had several discussions with those groups before we even put pen to paper, and these schemes are largely driven by that discussion. And one of the key components to providing a high level of building security in their minds was to provide a direct line of sight. And so in this case, we envision a kiosk would be located in the mixing hall, essentially at the junction of the 2 corridors. So, and what that does is it provides the SRO a location, it's a key location that they could look out the front door at the kids coming in from there. They could see, in here you see a stair kind of blocking the view, but there can be, the stair goes up. So you can theoretically still see the entrance from the bus drop off, and then you can see all the way down each of those corridors and have an idea of something. If there's motion happening when there shouldn't be motion, they should be able to know about it very quickly. And of course, that doesn't preclude cameras and other security measures, but direct line of sight is a logical first course of action that you can very easily monitor. We do anticipate that we would have a camera system down these corridors and at the entrances, and that would be monitored from the SRO kiosk, but also there would be a location in admin selected that would act as a secondary backup, because we certainly don't expect the SRO to not go to the restroom or have to investigate something, and then the rest of the school would still need to be monitored. So we've got several layers of backup in there. And when we get further into these schemes, we're going to be relying on those additional layers to a greater or lesser extent. And you'll see what I mean as we dig in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And this arrangement was actually, that was specifically developed in part from the discussion with the security team as one of the options. So this wasn't, in our mind, this was an automatic first place to start, specifically because of those sightlines. So let's move on to option number 2. So there here, you've got.
Brian, do you have a question? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Are we gonna go back and discuss all these later, or are we, like, gonna go through all of them after we go, or are we just gonna discuss as we go?
I was thinking that we could at least take questions as we go,
Okay.
and then do a discussion at the end.
Okay.
But I think it would be.
I had comments on them, but I didn't really have questions. That's why I was asking.
Okay. If it's, if we're, I guess, if it's specific, just a question or a comment on the layouts, then let's treat those as questions. And then that way at the end, we can only talk about comparison or, whether, each person, prefers one option over another, and we can use that as a closing discussion driver.
Okay.
So, yeah, so go ahead with your comments.
Well, my comment, it was comparing the two actually. On the 1B, where the second grade is in the different corridor, I know as a parent, I wouldn't like that. I know in the elementary school, there's a lot of them that don't like how there's 2 class, or there was, they've changed it, I think, haven't they, Jan? I haven't been there much, but I know there was 2 classrooms that are right there near the administrative offices that, parents didn't like that. And also, you had mentioned that there could be a hallway that goes to the gym. And I think what Jan was talking about earlier, where you've got a full grade level that's going to be going in and out of the gym, I think that that hallway is a must. To have that in there. And then
we agree.
My other comment was on the where the cafeteria is on one side or the other, and somebody mentioned a green room. I highly think that that should be an option where the cafeteria can be used as a green room and enter in through the stage, because otherwise that stage may not, be utilized to its full potential.
Right, and we talked about that as well, that you essentially could provide a double-sided stage, but there's a significant investment in terms of budget to make that happen. We've looked at, there are ways that if we shuffle some of the program around, we could align the stage so that way it works both well with the gym and the cafeteria. But really where the expense is in a standard stage, you would just have an enclosure on 3 sides and then a curtain on the 4th, and that would be your performance side. If you did it double-sided, you have a large assembly space on one side and then a large assembly space on the other side. And depending on how we have to set up the building in terms of the building code, we may need to have a fire-rated enclosure on one side or the other. But it would have to be demountable so that way you could do a performance on that side as well. So you're paying for structure to span across that opening, and then you're paying for that partition, which is a very expensive, like we're talking $100,000 in terms of investment just for the door. So we need to be very careful about, I guess, committing ourselves to a strategy like that. But there are definite advantages to being able to do that. So, maybe if that is something that, in terms of a priority, we can consider it further. But I don't know if it's necessary, considering, where our budget constraints are, I really wouldn't feel comfortable being able to promise that in terms of a building feature.
If there's not anything else, are you ready to go to 2? Okay, go ahead. Okay.
All right. So option 2, there's again, and I just mean the 2 without the 2A. This was envisioned as a very streamlined concept. The entrance hall works essentially the same. It gets a little bit longer depending on how the location of the cafeteria and the gym end up. But the idea here is essentially you have all the big stuff in the middle, admin, is across the hall from that big stuff, and then you have two classroom wings that plug in on each side, and it would essentially read as a long bar with a gymnasium and cafeteria pod on one side. And the reason for doing this is that it would be incredibly cost effective in terms of construction. This would be the way that this particular scheme is set up. It is of the three options, it is the physically smallest, it has the smallest building footprint. Unfortunately, if you look at the dimension on that bar from one end to the extreme far end, you're talking about 714 feet and 8 inches. So that is extremely long. And I don't know if that would be, we were concerned about, noise traveling from one end to the other. Although of course we would anticipate having doors to close it down, but there's no angle or, there's nothing to break up sound from traveling all the way down the corridors. But really the problem that we had becomes apparent when you start looking at the site plans. If you look at, this would be the, I guess, the K-8 School 2 site plan. And this has the long edge of that bar aligned with Skyline Drive about the Rotary. And so it kind of goes diagonal up to the left on the page. The main issue here is that if you look at that full line, it starts about, on the, past the middle of the school, and it goes, the school projects out over the surrounding land as you head to the east. And you're getting 20 feet of fill. And talking to Tommy Burleson and about that fill, the actual fill won't be quite as bad, but it is still fairly significant in that spot. So we're concerned about that. And then we're also concerned about the ability to provide access around that part of the building, because we do end up with a lot of steep slope. You have to push a lot of dirt in that direction for it to work. And just the length of this bar just makes it difficult to deal with. We do have another version showing the building rotated 90 degrees. And that is what's labeled K-8 School Option 2B, and that on Todd's site plan. And here again, what you're seeing is there's a lot of road happening. There's a lot less fill. That part is a lot more manageable. But what you find, and in fact the other version as well, is that the gymnasium is in the complete opposite direction of the school than you really want it to be. So it becomes difficult that if you're going to do a gym class, you have to then go to the gym class and then go outside through the school or go all the way around the building in order to access that. And while it's not impossible, one of the key components to school grades is travel distance and downtime. So if we can limit their downtime, then they can spend more time actually getting instruction. So we found it was a little bit cumbersome from that standpoint as well.
There's also an issue of play areas and access, easy access to play areas, and
yes,
both
right. It's all
A and
clustered
B.
at one end of the school, right? So if you look at option 2, it's all clustered just outside the cafeteria. And for instance, CDC is at the complete opposite end of the building. And so again, it's a long distance for those kids to have to travel. Again, our discussion from yesterday would hold true here that we maybe would want to move it closer to the middle in this case, but that's a future discussion. But they also need their own dedicated play area because they have, they have, and so we would need to readjust this parking lot, for the admin and the bus loop side in order to accommodate that. And that part of the site, so we're not sure how much we can get, although it might be possible. The other thing is that the bus drop off itself is pretty long and it's difficult to get away from that. It's not terribly efficient in terms of getting the buses in or out, and we're probably looking at some sloping in order to make that work. So the kids would then have to go uphill again to get to the front door. So we're not entirely sure how viable this would ultimately be. And then, so we looked at that and we thought, okay, can we make this a little bit better? Can we pull the building in and preserve the idea of maintaining, the simple construction, and also get CDC closer, provide a better location for the arts and the band, and get the gymnasium on the proper side of the school. And so that's where option 1 or 2A came from, which we indeed do that. But when you look at the site plan, we haven't really solved any of the problems for all that effort. So what we're finding is we were only able to get the building down to 680 feet, which is still pretty significant. But so we've only gained 1 classroom in terms of length, which I was hoping for a lot more than that. And we've even plugged in the cafeteria as part of, and it's a nice prominent location. It can almost operate as more of an open common if the district were open to that, rather than an enclosed cafeteria. But again, you also end up with noise issues and things like that in that situation. So we're not entirely sure if that works, although access from the site is a little bit easier. So if you look at this site plan, the bus loop is a little bit better. It's more compact. But what we end up dealing with is this north wing with the gymnasium, the auxiliary gym, all the related arts, all heading up to the north, and it really reduces the amount of standard parking available. And Todd had to go through some considerable effort to get the parking that he does have, and some of it's not terribly conveniently accessed. So the ability for this particular building shape to work on the site is a little bit, again, we're not convinced that it would be the most effective use, even though on the face of it, the concept was absolutely solid. And if the building was on a level site and we could, if this were in Iowa, it would be great, but not here, unfortunately. So any questions on this scheme? I know I kind of essentially talked it down, but I thought that, again, the issues that we've been developing and finding, I wanted to make sure everybody is aware of it, primarily because on the face of it, it looks like a great logical layout. All right. Well, if there's no questions or comments, I'm going to move on to option 3. Now this is, again, it's somewhat similar to option 1 in terms of basic organization. The main difference here is we've taken that south wing and bent it up toward the north wing. And what that does is it gets the overall building footprint, even though the building area is just about the same size, the actual required footprint is much less because we've essentially folded it back on itself and tied a knot. And what that does is it allows additional light, and we've taken all the big spaces and rather have to jam them all into a big blob, we can stretch that out, very simple structure march down and create all of those larger spaces. And then everything in that main corridor becomes the organizing element. And you get a little bit of a drop of a open space at the south end. So in this case, we would have the parent drop off again. It would be coming at admin, and then the bus drop off in this case would actually enter near the cafeteria. And we would be using that corridor in between essentially as the main organizing element. So to Jan, to your question before on option 1 in terms of circulation, this layout clearly addresses that factor a lot more easily, but provides those spaces still in a convenient location. but everything is much more easily accessed. And then the physical separation between the gymnasium and the cafeteria reduces the amount of crossing traffic you might have. So that might work a little bit better. Of course, in this version, you know, we lose a little bit of the compactness from option 1. And so there would be more exterior walls to build it, et cetera. But it does provide a really logically laid out building. One of the main drawback to this, though, is of course that really great security layout that we had in option 1, and then also option 2 provided it as well, because you had that one pivot point and you can turn around in a circle and essentially see everything. Clearly here you don't get that. So in this case, we would be more reliant upon cameras and other types of monitoring to make sure that that other wing remains secure, although that is not terribly different from, again, from Boones Creek or any of the other schools in the district at this point. So that would be, that would be something that would need, we do lose on the security, but if that is not the absolute primary driver, if we are looking, if we need to look at cost, then this option might become a lot more viable. And the main reason for that is site the site compactness. And when you look at the site plans, you'll see that there's a lot more room. So for instance, for option 3, there's 2 versions, one that has a track and then one that does not have a track. So let's look at the one with the track first. That essentially places the...
Jay?
Yes.
I think Jan had a question earlier on.
I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Just on the layout in the middle of that, you have play and courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
That is a teacher's nightmare.
And
you have open windows looking into that play and courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
It is such a distraction with children. So, if you got real creative of what you were going to do with that, rather than having people out there all the time. I see that you have other play areas.
Yes. In fact, yeah, that's in your concern there is exactly what we heard yesterday. So we've already looked at what can we do. And so looking at, if you compare the site plan to the building, one of the changes we would propose is that the play and courtyard area would not have play, certainly not in the middle anyway. And if we would be conceptually providing a play area near the bus drop-off, which would be convenient to pre-K, and that has specific requirements, multiple surfaces and storage and things like that. And then you could also provide one at CDC further down, and they would each have their needs met there. Now, another option might be to actually place the CDC play area actually in the courtyard, but you can screen that so it is only those kids who actually use it and can actually see in there. It'll also buffer the sound and prevent noise from carrying through. We have, as we said, there's the play areas up by the parent entrance. Another potential would be to stick it over at the end. We've got the 2 expansion areas labeled that we could put one at the end of that corridor, not in the courtyard, but essentially next to it, and fence that in and provide screening as well. So there's multiple avenues and options that we can use to get the play out of that courtyard. What we do envision that would be appropriate for that would be things like having the art patio there, or having a little outdoor space, or just simply landscaping it so that way it becomes a nice quiet area, and that anybody looking out on that can,
would be great for your gardening area.
Yes, it really would, because I mean, Todd, do you have any idea what the acreage is on that?
Hold on a second and I'll tell you.
Okay, I'll stall in the meantime.
That way it wouldn't necessarily have so many children out there at the same time. I'm just thinking through different classes, different teachers I've talked to about an open area like that in between where windows are. It's very distracting, but could be very beautiful.
Right, and right, if you put raised beds in there, we talked about if we, for the ag program, they would potentially want up to an acre of of area that they could work the land. And I don't know if it would necessarily be viable to put it right in the middle of the building, although I could certainly see that being really great. I mean, that would be phenomenal.
So your answer is about a half acre
Okay.
between the two wings.
Okay. So, you could probably put, certainly raised beds and things like that, and then maybe more of a landscape part of it, but there's a lot of options for it. And I think as a courtyard, just as a function, I think the main feature of that is you get a common space that everybody can look either across or down from the upper floor into, and have that amenity, even though it's not necessarily used for large scale functions or anything to that effect. If you have not to say that we necessarily want that, but it could also be if it was secured, it could also be a nice place to have overflow. If you're doing an event after school or in the evening, you can do a garden party out there or something. There's a lot of options for it. So we haven't necessarily defined it to this point, but yeah, we definitely have. We don't intend to put play there anymore, but there's certainly lots of other great things we can do.
It'd be very, very aesthetically pleasing.
Yes, yes. I mean, we even thought that, in terms of the site layouts, we didn't really end up doing it, but if as we develop it, it works better. It might even be nice, and Todd had the point that if we had the bus drop off closer to the Rotary, for instance, and you had a procession that the kids come in and they go through that courtyard as they come to and from school, that would be a nice experience, getting them ready for the day, just the simple act of walking into the building. I think it might be kind of far to go. And so the place where we had it located, I think, is probably just more convenient. But, again, it's just another option that's available.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things I think in talking to Tommy Burleson, and the fact that it would be limited, it could be a beautiful space, but there's not any reason for that wing that is angled out not to be perpendicular under those circumstances.
Right. Yeah, that's another good point, Bob. Thank you. The angle produced by that south wing is essentially aesthetic, although it provides additional space in the courtyard side and at the bus drop-off side. But with some compromise and some careful relocation, we could straighten that out, maintain the concept of the courtyard, have the bus drop-off still work, and then save some money from the budget. And I think that would certainly be one of those. We're going to have to get some dollar feedback on that to determine if we can even do it. But at this point, I think if we go with this route, we probably would just end up straightening that out. But we would still have a great courtyard to be able to do.
And on the other side of that wing, would provide more space for there to be separate playground areas again.
Exactly.
PK and CDC.
Right. Absolutely. So a couple things to point out about this version. There's a lot of great things about it, and one fairly substantial concern that I have with it. The first great thing is that you see that cut fill line has almost no fill, and the fill that's there is just is 7 feet, which when you bring the foundation and the footing down is actually less than that. So what this layout represents actually a very minimal investment in order to prep the site in order to be able to be used, and we don't need to remediate any soil. We're just taking it away and then using it for parking or the ball fields or whatever else. So this would be the easiest to work with from a structural standpoint, and from we're not putting as much money into the ground as we would be putting it into the building. So that is really nice, and I think that's a great option. You also notice, as I noted before, this is the only option you see that really fits a track on here. So even if the project budget doesn't allow for a track, we could plan for it in space and in grading, and then have it ready to go to be added at a later date. but this does have enough room to provide that. So that is another great feature. If we did not plan to have that, we could move the main parking area a bit to the east and slide the building around a little bit, maybe to provide better parking and better bus access on the Cherokee Street side. But you know, at this point, you can see that there's a lot that this provides the most opportunity for site amenities. You look at the following in the last site diagram.
Let me say one other thing about the track, and I pointed this out, I guess, when we were talking about the pros and cons of different options. The track takes up a lot of space. You know, when we did talk to the athletic directors, they recommended other priorities besides the track. We're just, you know, we're making it, it's not, I guess, really, we're throwing it out there in terms of, you know, where the track fits as a priority. In order to get that track in, there's a good bit of space that's eliminated with that, including those 2 small soccer fields and play areas. And so it's taking up space that it sort of depends on the priorities, I guess, in terms of, you know, the majority of kids and how that space might be used. But you know, that's a call that needs to be made at some point in time, because if the track is necessary in here, then, you know, this option is pretty much it in terms of the school layout.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the track, I know there's you know, there is support for putting one in at this facility, but in terms of managing the budget, mostly due to its size, and also the grading required to maintain that, it is a logical element to remove from the site, simply because you know, you'd save a lot of, you know, it makes everything a lot more manageable in terms of laying out the remaining portions of the site, but also the existing, you know, not to dictate or really say what should be done with the existing school buildings after this project is done, but there is a track already over there. And if part of that site were to be used as a public athletic facility, at least in terms of using that track, that the grading is already done and it can be repaved, and then you have a track available to the public. But I think that, you know, based on feedback from this athletic department and then also from other districts, I've honestly never seen an elementary school or middle school actually have a track. And when they do have one, they tend to be paired physically with a high school that uses it a lot more. So I would say that in terms of the placing the needs of the school first, the track becomes a fairly low priority, at least from that standpoint.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I personally feel like we do need a track. I know a lot of our kids get out there during PE or whatever it is and just walk the track or do whatever. We have some programs like Girls on the Run and things like that. And personally, I think we need one, and I'd actually like to, if we could, run that through our athletics committee and see, you know, what the consensus of the board is, and see what, if it is something we want as a board. And with that,
I agree, Todd. I agree, Todd. If you build it, they will come. The kids would love it.
And I also, if I can, a comment, or I guess it's a question. All these, and it might be a little early for it, but I'll ask and you can put it off if you want to answer them. But all the designs, the school is close to the road, North Cherokee Street.
Yes.
Is there a reason why we didn't try to maybe center the school back off the road and maybe put a field or something towards Cherokee, or just get the school away from the road a little bit?
In very early concepts, we did do that just so that we could see what happened. And this was quite a long time ago. but two main priorities came to light. The first is that if we put the school more toward the middle of the site or toward the east end of the site, then really the just visually and, we want the school, it needs to be prominent. Partly because we people who come to this facility need to know that this is a school, and then the athletic stuff is secondary to that. It's to support the school. And we felt in part that that if we put the building too far back, it would get lost and it would not be seen. Really, it would be more about the athletic component. So we were concerned about that and losing that impact. We are also looking at it in terms of one of the main real things to think about is in terms of the car stacking. That if you put the building where we have it, that is the easiest way to maximize car stacking for in and out, pickup and drop off. Simply by virtue of having that road go across to the east and then being able to have the lot come back. That slingshot effect provides the most bang for the buck in terms of providing that. Otherwise, you would end up having a serpentine, some sort of a serpentine element within the site itself to help create that car stacking, and it would take up a lot more space on the site. So we're looking at using all of these site elements for multiple purposes wherever we can, and that was certainly one of them. So the building location provided a distinct advantage in terms of doing that, particularly given the budget that we need to stay inside.
So in talking to Todd about that issue, the middle of the site is the worst site to put the building because of the fill issue. If it's not near the road, then it would need to be on where the softball fields are. And again, that sort of takes the athletic facilities into a different, it puts them a lot closer to existing residential houses, which, if it goes on the east end where it's located now, there's only a few people that it could possibly impact if you had athletics going on at nighttime, and that's a factor in terms of its location.
Yep.
Bill, did you have a comment earlier?
I did. Thanks for recognizing me. I think if you watch the behavior of adults and children around a track, you give them the option of an asphalt track versus a natural turf field, they'll gravitate toward that asphalt every time, because particularly when the grass is wet, they don't want to walk in wet grass. Go right over to Jonesboro Middle right now and watch a phys ed class, and they'll be on that track 10 times before they'll get out on the grass because it's cleaner and dry.
Thank you.
All right. So I guess I think I agree that it does make sense to maybe put the issue of the track to the athletic committee and determine exactly what the need is, and we can determine how that's going to affect the building layout and the site layout. So I'd like to move on and just talk about one other thing. And this is actually the rotation of the building is when you're looking at the site option that has the track, that's the real main drawback to this version. And we might be able to work with this layout and accommodate a little bit. But what you're looking at here is essentially both classroom wings are getting southwest exposure, which quite honestly is the worst type of light exposure that you can get because it's so difficult to control. And I was speaking to Bob about this earlier today, but essentially if you have the other option that does not show the track, so that other option for this layout shows the building rotated again, it's lined up with Skyline Drive. And the reason for that is that puts most of the classrooms in an ideal orientation that they either have direct north light or direct south light, which is the easiest to control. And then we only have a couple rooms that have to deal with the west light. And then of course the ends of the classrooms don't really have any windows on them. So that's not an issue. So rotating the building provides distinct advantages. And this is in terms of glare, needing to raise or lower shades, also heat gain when you get toward the end of the year and in the beginning of the year. It's a lot easier to manage these issues if you can get the building to be north and south. If you rotate it to 45 degrees, you have essentially the south light and the west light, and it gets harder to control those things without adding expense. Now the obvious response to that would be, well, we can just put in some shades. And that is certainly true, although, and we can work with it as best we can. But one of the issues with that, of course, is we're spending $30 million on a new building. Do we want to then make all the kids lower the shades after coming from a school that doesn't have windows? So I think there might be, that might be problematic. But if we do have to orient the building that way, we could probably work with it, but it would not be ideal for a number of reasons. Then looking at that last site option, other than having a track or not having a track, we've rotated the football fields again, so it's oriented with the building, provides a more compact layout. And then the bus drop off and the administrative parking is clustered toward the south, where the kids would come in for the essentially off the bus loop. Other than that, the function of the site, really all of these site options is very similar. Really what we're doing is just changing the geometry of the parking to accommodate the building location and the building shape. So any questions about option 3?
Well, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
If I may, please. In looking at this last one, number 3, who's the entrance to the gym going to be for after hours events for the families or kids compared to the parking? Looks like the majority of the parking is to the east of the building. Where's the gymnasium entrance going to be from that parking lot? Where would the flow be?
They would come in that main entrance. So they would go in where the kids would normally go in during the day. The difference would be in the evening, you would have the classroom wings locked off. So that way you can't go further into the school. And it would be a function that would be based at the gym. And then conversely, if you're doing it at the cafeteria, you would lock off the north wing and the south wing, but you would allow people back to the cafeteria. So, but that keeps the parking close to that main entrance. And as we mentioned before, it allows us to use that main entrance as a lobby for those larger functions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right. Well, if there's no more questions on the scheme, then I think we should move on to talking about if there's any just general preferences or opinions and what you guys think, one versus the other.
This is Jody. I have a couple of questions. One is just, you've mentioned a little bit about cost, and when do we get to a place where we can really see, like, more specifically what something would cost versus something else, like getting into the finer math on those kinds of decisions?
It is still a little bit early, but we have given all of these layouts to Burleson to begin the really, far away view sort of estimating and offer some feedback in terms of, which layout would be more economical versus another. We've gotten some feedback already from a meeting from last week. One of the, the cut fill, of course, was one of them. Site compactedness is another, but there's also other issues. So for instance, if you looked at option one is a great example, but really all of these have these conditions in one place or another. But where you transition, any place where you transition from single story up to a 2-story, that's going to be a relatively expensive construction, because for that single story portion, you have to build the footings, the foundation walls, exterior walls, and the roof. And in depending on the condition and the situation, it may cost just as much to build extra square footage and take that up to 2 stories. So we need to do that analysis and find out where it makes sense to economize like that. And even so, the building area may grow, but the cost may not change. Or we can find some happy in the middle solution to these things. But we're already starting to get that feedback. In terms of the project budget, we feel that the budget's not going to change. We're simply working to that budget. So whether or not the building is cost more or less, I'm not sure if that's really going to ultimately be one of the drivers in how we approach it. I think it's going to have to be the other way, that where the building cost is going to cost what the building costs, and we need to provide as much of that building as possible to provide as much as we can for the kids.
Thank you. And just one more question that's been on my mind. One of the really attractive things about this project from a county-wide perspective is its potential to attract people to the area and, drive economic growth and development. And I'm really excited about the potential of this town, county, school partnership kind of as a novel way of developing a school, developing the property around it, and really building something bigger than the school. And the topic of the school being kind of like a magnet school for the arts or something that's really special and different has been discussed a few different times. And I know that 99.9% of what makes it that would be the people in it and the activities that were engaged. I know there are lots of other really good ideas too, kind of leveraging the arts idea came from the idea that Jonesboro has quite a tradition in terms of the arts and all the storytelling center and all these kinds of things. Other ideas have been agriculture or etc. Regardless, whether it's art or whether it's something else, I absolutely would agree that most of that is programming and people and the things that go on in the school rather than the school building itself. But my point that I'm eventually going to make here is that I do feel like setting some of that goal in stone, so to speak, creating the structure, even in some small symbolic way toward that aim, is a really exciting, unifying, kind of visionary way to think about it. And I just wanted to introduce that idea. If the arts is the way we decide to go, or is the vision of everyone, and people feel good about that, then how, without any kind of big elaborate changes or anything like that, how do we kind of set a marker for that physically in the building so that its purpose and vision is really tangible and visible? That's all I wanted to say about that.
Well, thank you. In terms of special programs, and I think Bob could probably, he's a lot more informed on what might be possible here. There is a strong argument to be made for pursuing programs to that nature, so that way that this could be a magnet school. But we've also had discussion about other different types of programs that could be included in the school, either up front as part of this project or later on that could be plugged in. And I think what we would need to do here, and at least in terms of this specific building endeavor, would be to set the building up so that way, if we had the direction set, and that can't come from me, or that really has to come from the district. Do they, is this something that they can do? Is this something that they can then maintain? Then we can work toward that goal, whether it be, a performing arts magnet or a STEM magnet or agricultural magnet, whatever it is. We can probably do that. And I think that there's support and, or certainly we've seen a lot of support for these types of programs. And I think that if we were going to be doing that, then we would at least need to settle what the ultimate goal is and then figure out what we can accomplish with the budget we have.
Great, thank you. I would love to see maybe Mayor Vest as chair, kind of bring that up with folks on the committee that are engaged in those areas and kind of see if there's a way to build something special like that into the school, and even in a nominal or symbolic way, a placeholder for growth in that way in the future. So
I think that's really important. I appreciate you bringing it up, Jody. There has been there's been a good bit of work, at least brainstorming on the programmatic side of that. Jan has been working with McKinney Center staff, and they've done some really great, homework on that in terms of what might be possible within the school itself as far as the arts are concerned, and what might take place after school, what might take place at the McKinney Center. How do you work a comprehensive program together? And I appreciate the efforts that they've made. And when you've seen an agriculture building, we've Dr. Flannery was very helpful and in a group of people that came together. There was I think you all got some of the minutes of that meeting. There's really an interest in especially for the middle school kids in providing some educational opportunities for them. I think the consensus of that group was that it really needed to be something that became that could be attached or close to the school, but needed its own space outside of it. So that's why you see that agricultural building being in there as a possibility. The homework, obviously there has to be a way to fund that. When we talk about magnet, there's always, I think, sort of been the assumption that when you do a magnet school, that funding for that is coming mainly from the school system itself. And so, we've sort of referred it to more as a community-based education where the community has more responsibility for coming up with the funding of the program and not the school system itself. So I think that working through those kinds of aspects, both in the arts and agriculture in particular, that there's community support. We already know there are people who are really interested in seeing that happen, and how that gets blended into the programming is one issue, and then how it gets blended into the space within the school is another. And so we're aware of it, but it's sort of we've sort of looked at the timing of it being that we really need to take care of the main priorities of the school, and then look at where we are, going back to your question about budget, look at where we are, what's possible. Do we have a flex space that's next to the art rooms that allows for some community access, into those rooms, or, where they're close to the art rooms? Those are the kinds of things that we need to look at, but we're really not at that stage at this point in time to make those decisions.
that sounds perfect in terms of timing. I just wanted to make sure there was a placeholder for that conversation when the moment comes. Thank you.
Jan, if it's okay with you, I'll be glad to send Jody the stuff that you all worked on. It's awesome. Is that an okay?
Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry, I was looking for my button.
Okay.
So do we have any other questions or comments on the options?
Well, as to Jody's narrative about the arts, if it's possible to set up, like you said, there are extra little areas that you have throughout these plans that could be set up for things like that. I'm still not 100% about the stage being right with the gym, but I don't know how you can change that. There's been a lot of issue with stages being in with the gym. Is this a separate entity or is it actually joined to the gym?
The idea is that it would be joined to the gym. It would be essentially the gym would be the house for for anything happening on the stage. So if it's a graduation or a concert or a play performance or something like that, the audience would be located in the gym.
All right, just from the arts perspective or anything else, actually, there are so many things that, as far as having to have not theater productions, but use of a small theater area, whether it be the EPIC programs that we have, and those are done by grade level while the gym is still being used. There's so many things that, are totally separate that I don't know how that would be combined in one area. So
it's definitely one of those things that we would need to strongly consider if we were going to use the school as a performance space. I know one of the options, that we kind of tossed around a while back was, if they use the school for rehearsal and then have the stage act as any other stage attached to a gymnasium, maybe those performances could actually occur not at the school, but they could occur at maybe McKinney or someplace or at Jackson, and those things would be it would be more of a scheduling thing when you actually do the performances. So that would be more community involved, and we're not sure if that works logistically, but it was one of the ideas tossed out there.
I wasn't really referring to that as much as I was grade level activities that are going on, healthcare assemblies that we have for different grade levels at the same time.
Okay.
That the gym is it's actually the school functions that I'm talking about, not even
I gotcha. Okay.
theater production.
It
It's
is an
almost a necessity to have two separate areas.
It is an issue, and when we talked to related arts people at Boones Creek, the amount of activity before and after school and during school in the gym prevented them from doing, it was a major roadblock in them even practicing or doing anything on the stage. And then the fact that stage layout, with the gym is sort of, perpendicular to the seating in there. So if you actually have an event in the gym that you're using the stage for, the more likelihood is it's going to be in the center of the gym where the bleachers can be used, as opposed to all the trouble that's necessary to set up a seating area within the gym itself. So it's one of the problems is how to fit. Where does it fit? Does it get connected to the cafeteria, to an end of the cafeteria or something like that, where there may be a little bit more flexibility in how that space might be used, and there's times when it's much less active, or does it get tied to a smaller space like the auxiliary gym or somewhere like that, where you have a much smaller audience in it, but it may end up being used more often in a smaller space.
Parents, I was excited to see the possibility of having it connected to the cafeteria. I know that the sound using the stage in a gymnasium like that, the acoustics are always so bad. If you do have like a singing something with music or band, we all know it's not the best sound in a gymnasium in a big room like that. So if there is some other way we could think about doing that different, I don't know if maybe it's with the cafeteria or the auxiliary gym or the library, or
could it still be tied into like an area where the music room would be?
Right.
Um,
And even for meetings like PTA meetings and, you
There's
know,
just so many times that the gym is actually being used when the theater area or stage area would have to be used, especially when the principals are giving their epic assemblies. The Christmas programs are often done at maybe kindergarten through second grade, then third through fourth. It's always separated, so it's not going to be able to be going on when you've got classes in the gym, which are usually 2 at a time. So I don't know how that's going to work.
No, that's definitely a concern. And what we've been finding is the gymnasium and really the athletics department tends to monopolize a lot of these large spaces. And sometimes even the cafeteria gets taken up by, cheerleading practice or something like that, honestly, I wouldn't have expected to have those types of things in there. But if the athletics department is particularly active, then, they're going to use the gym first. They're going to, and so the question of where do we put that stage, how do we actually make that function becomes a lot more difficult. And, we don't necessarily have a solution to that yet.
Right. With all the potential that we talk about this school having being, grand and new and a community school kind of thing. I would hate for it to look like a cafegianatorium. You know what I mean?
Right.
I would hate that connotation. So
no,
I agree.
No, understanding, where you're coming from. But also, again, at least to this point, our basis of design simply in terms of meeting the district's needs ahead of really anything else, because this does have to be a school first, and then it can be a special school on top of that. But in order to make that work, we've essentially just, again, used Boones Creek as the template to make this stuff work, because we know that the district is comfortable with that. And in terms of that, we just kept the same relationship of the stage to the gymnasium, and that is how it functions at Boones Creek. So that's what we've started with here. And we can, again, we can develop it further. Perhaps, it makes more sense to come off of the cafeteria, even though that's not ideal either. But, I think we need to really look at that analysis and find out what's going to make sense, and the extent to which the school will be used as a performing arts magnet will certainly make a difference in terms of what priority we place on that stage location.
If part of your comment is the location of that stage an important issue, and is it being discussed? Is there a possibility of it being somewhere else besides the gym? That has been constantly discussed. I can tell you that.
Yeah, noise level and acoustics are always an issue when the stage is in with the gym or the
and the reality, unfortunately, is that until you get to a high school level, generally performing arts are not. And this is just, the typical for a school, that the performing arts aren't necessarily prioritized. And this would, indeed be a special school if that does become one of the priorities, because it just changes fundamentally how a lot of it functions. So, the ideal situation, of course, and what you see in a high school is you would just simply build an auditorium. And in this case, the site doesn't really allow that. And the budget absolutely doesn't really allow that. So, whatever we do here in terms of a performance space and dealing with that scheduling issue, is going to have to be a compromise. We just need to figure out what's going to be the best compromise.
These KRA guys are just going to have to be creative. That's what they're going to have to come up with a brand.
I mean, I'd love to have it levitated off the side of the gym, but I don't know. I don't think we have the technology yet.
Brian has a comment.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, I know this is kind of small really, but I would like to see whichever we pick from an athletic standpoint, the gymnasium and locker rooms being as close to the soccer, football, and baseball fields as we can for a few issues. One is just the amount of space that we have to walk, especially that when we have to walk across a parking lot. Because a lot of times, even when we go out to practice, especially for football, I know they go out a little bit earlier, or they used to when they were at the same school. There's still cars moving around out there, you know. So I mean, we would have to walk around, you know, and all that. And like for soccer, for instance, you know, we're carrying the balls, and then a lot of other equipment. I know football players, they've got just their pads and stuff like that. But I mean, one of the issues that we run into is like rain. Like when a storm comes, sometimes they just pop out of nowhere. You know, I mean, you can check weather and all that all you want, and they'll pop out of nowhere. And there's nowhere for us, from what I've seen on some of these, you know, there's nowhere for us to get quickly on some of these schemes to be covered. And another reason that I personally have is I make my kids leave their bags and stuff in the locker room, mainly so that if it does just come a little downpour, you know, I'm not having to stop practice to go, you know, have to worry about where their backpacks are, if their books are being ruined and papers being ruined and all that stuff. So, I mean, you know, even if it's just something like a shed or something, if we decide to go one of these where it's a little bit further out, there's some kind of shed, or if that maintenance shed and athletics equipment, if there's just a space there where they can, you know, put their stuff, or just gives us somewhere you know, to stay dry and stuff like that. I mean, that's something I would like to see considered just from the athletic standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the location of that maintenance shed, I would think that there's quite a lot of flexibility in that, and it's really just going to be proximity to the most field area, and then, you know, where does it fit on the topography. There's also, we're expecting a small concession and restroom building for the football field, and that would probably be located either between the parking lot and the field in that bleacher area, or as you see in some of the site layouts, it's actually kind of off the corner of the gym. And I think in terms of, you know, locating the main locker room in the gymnasium close to the fields, I think that options 1 and 3 really get there in the best. Again, you know, having that bend in the building provides us the ability to strategically locate that stuff in relation to the site. And I think that particularly if you look at the very last site plan that orients the building true north-south, like as I was talking about, that places it very close to the football field. And then both the site options for option 1 get there fairly closely as well. And it looks like the proximity is almost identical. So I think we can certainly do that. If we had to go with the, you know, building option 3, and we know that we have to have the track, then, you know, you're probably going to end up in a situation where you do have to go across the parking lot like we show there, although we could certainly work that to minimize that distance. But one of our priorities has been to have those, you know, I mentioned the site adjacencies, and that's one of the primary ones. That athletics is close to athletics, and you have easy in and out for everybody. So yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at that and hoping that we can improve that.
Is there a reason why the maintenance shed is where it's at, the athletic? Because I mean, if we were going to use it to where, you know, coaches would have access to it to store things, that's kind of an odd space for it. Is there a reason it's where it's at?
Honestly, at this point, not especially. You probably, you know, looking at, for instance, you know, again, going back to that very last site layout, it probably would be, you know, make more sense if it was located essentially between the end of the football field and that closest baseball field, where there's a junction in the asphalt, simply because that provides you the ability to move stuff in 3 directions. You know, you have the option to go 3 ways. So I think, you know, again, those little buildings, except for maybe the scoring tower for the baseball fields, you know, there's quite a bit of flexibility in that, and we can get into that, you know, have better placement and arrangement of those buildings as we get into it. Quite honestly, because of their size, we were more concerned about having the fields themselves, and then the parking, and then the school itself worked out first, and then we'll get to those later on. But I definitely agree that we can improve that.
It's mainly on the plan to remind us we need one.
Yeah, essentially.
Is there any other comments or I do want to ask Philip McLean, would it be helpful in talking about the athletic committee if we sent the packet that you all got, if we just sent it to the members of the athletic committee, would that be helpful?
I think it would be.
Okay, well, we'll be glad to do that.
If I'm not mistaken, Todd is on the athletic committee, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know if is he still on?
Bob, you can rely on my office to transmit any materials to board members if they need.
Okay, go through you? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that'd be great. We'll get you the package if that'd be helpful. Okay.
Great. Anyone else?
Okay, anything else? I guess that the next meeting is I guess the last Wednesday in June. I didn't look that up, but you got another one, Brian?
Well, I just got this, I don't know how far ahead we're gonna be scheduling these meetings, but I didn't think about this. June and July will be okay because I can schedule practices, but starting in August, assuming everything's planned, I'll be at practice during this time every Wednesday. So, you know, if we're gonna start scheduling that far ahead, we need to possibly look at changing the time.
Okay, you all think about that. Yeah, obviously we'll meet based on your all's availability, the majority of the people. So if there's another time, you know, we've been fortunate to be okay thus far. So, you know, at this point, we'll go ahead and plan for the one in June. But then after, you know, if you want to change the meeting date, you know, can you all, you know, either send something in or you know, think about another date that you can talk about at the June meeting. So, does anybody have anything else? If not, Ken, or you and Jay have anything else? We'll go ahead. We greatly appreciate your time and input and patience.
No, I appreciate everybody making the time to serve on the committee, and a lot of good input. We're making notes of whatever's been suggested. Incorporate as many of the ideas as possible, and try to work it with the budget, you know, because the money's set. We don't have any extra money. Try to incorporate as much as we can.
I'll end with this comment that, you know, we're continuing to meet with, and Dr. Flannery's been very helpful in getting us connected, especially the principals. You know, those frontline people are really helpful. They know what these relationships ought to be. And so we have another meeting on Friday, and you know, we're continuing to talk about the details. And I think, you know, our goal is when the school opens, that nobody has to change anything around, that it actually, you know, the classroom spaces work the way they were originally intended. And in order for that to happen, we really need to have the input from the principals, and we greatly appreciate Dr. Flannery setting that up. I think that's going to be really helpful. And again, we appreciate you all, and you know, thank you for your participation.
Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, just quick. Bob, did you get my email from where I met with the teachers? I never got a reply from you.
You know, be honest,
I sent it right after our meeting last time.
Really? I need to go back.
I sent another email about a week ago and never heard.
Okay, for some reason I must have either, you know, I am getting old. That's one thing, but I will go look for it. If you can, you send it one more time?
Sure. Yeah.
And I have changed computers and this kind of thing, and it's possible it got lost in that shuffle somewhere. I apologize.
No worries, I'll get it to you.
If you don't mind sending it one more time, that's bobb@jonesburgtn.org. And again, we appreciate Glenn Rosenoff being on here and hanging with us. He's doing great.
I'm using a cardboard layout of myself next time, so I can move around. Now, but I want to say thanks to everybody. I mean, just having so many options from Ken and Jay and and Todd on the layouts. I think we're getting jam-packed with full of information at least. So I appreciate everybody's efforts, and you, Bob, as well.
Thank you. You all have a great evening, and thanks again for your help.
I just sent that
Thanks.
to you again, Bob.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Good night.